Alright, ready? Okay, this in the mic screen. 5, 4, 3, 2, action!
Welcome to the Weekend UpTake. I'm Jennifer Wiggum, and we are coming to you live from downtown St. Paul in the shadow of Minnesota's state capitol. Coming up this week, we will talk cyber wars with John Hoffoss, and our roundtable tackles taxes, tea parties, and high-speed trains. But first, our senior political correspondent, Noah Cunin. Noah?
Thanks, Jennifer. Now, all across the country this past week, the tax day tea parties erupted in general protest against taxes and a growing U.S. deficit. Now, I was in Washington, D.C. covering one of these tax parties, and organizers attempted to dump 1 million tea bags, that's $10,000 worth, in front of the White House. But when Washington, D.C. district officials put the kibosh on that, they loaded those tea bags back into a truck and sent them into exile. I tracked down where those tea bags went and ended up at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a Washington, D.C. think tank, and found out a lot about how these protests were organized. And we'll cue that clip now, and when we come back, an interview with John Hoffoss.
We have to worry about whether or not we're the right shaped vegetables and so on. Regulatory taxes, the overall indirect taxes, and the general level of taxes overall are all things CI is involved with. CI is a activist public policy free market group, and we're integrated, vertically integrated in the sense that we go from preparing the intellectual ammunition, the analytic work, market it, build alliances, and then actually engage the advocacy process, sort of a soup-to-nut approach, trying to make good policy, good politics.
What has been your participation in the activities today on April 15th?
Well, as you can see, we're actually having a lot of fun putting together packages. CI has long been involved in addressing the overall burden of government, the tax in the broadest sense, the way in which government taxes its citizens by burdens that are often hidden and so forth. And what we're seeing is more and more an attempt to move us from this is what we think this is the burden we're going to place on you because we think it's worthwhile, to indirect taxes, the green tea taxes now, as we're now talking about, global warming taxes that Michelle Bachmann and Chris Horner have talked about in the past, but also regulatory taxes, the way in which we have to fill in forms, we have to have to apply for applications. There are decisions that they're going to impose a massive regulatory tax on the U.S. economy and the U.S. consumers, the whole taxation of the financial service industry through regulation, burdens through tax regulation, but also their proposals for cap and trade. Their decision that we're going to impose a charge every time we cut our lights on, we move our cars, we make ourselves more comfortable, we do anything that involves energy use, which is essentially everything we do, and that tax is totally buried. We're not really taxing anyone, we're just imposing environmental purity on Americans. You know, there's only three things government can do. It can tax us, it can regulate us, or it can inflate us. And no one, I think, who has looked at the amount of money now being spent, the trillions and trillions of dollars being spent, believes that it's going to be possible to avoid taxes today, taxes tomorrow, or inflation. And that's what all of us, I think, fear, that as bad as the situation is now, by essentially raising spending and by borrowing against America's future, our children's future, the tax burden that we're now imposing on Americans, whether it's through inflation or through honest taxes or through borrowing, is going to be extending into the infinite future. Bush administration started this mess, but Obama looks like he's doubling up on it.
Welcome back to the Weekend UpTake. I'm Jim Norton, joined here by John Hoffoss. John, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for being here. John, you are, if my memory serves, an information security consultant, and you were a judge at the 2009 Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. Is that right?
I was a judge for the state competition, Upper Midwest, here down in Inver Hills Community College in Inver Grove Heights.
For those of us who don't defend anything in the cybersphere, what's the nature of this competition? How does it work?
Well, the competition is set up with teams from different colleges. We had 6 teams from Minnesota colleges. We had 6 from Minnesota at the state competition, and we had 6 from Minnesota, from Michigan, and from Illinois at the regional competition. Each team is given a network of computers that they are then given responsibility for. And so they take this network and they actually begin securing and patching systems, installing antivirus and configuring firewalls and things of this nature. The whole time throughout this weekend-long competition, I'm also giving them what we called in the competition business injects or tasks. So it could be anywhere from install a printer to set up a new server and configure a new website on that server. And then at the same time, through both of those lines of business, there's a red team of professional hackers actually trying to break into their network the whole time.
So there's a red team kind of going after every team's network, and if your network isn't sufficiently secure, the red team gets in, and presumably you forfeit points.
Yes.
What kind of skills are involved in this? What makes someone talented at this particular activity?
Well, I think in this activity, a lot of the successful teams had a real methodical approach to securing their network and managing that system. Pretty similar to a real-world situation in that respect. The other thing that really makes someone excel in security is a willingness and an eagerness to break things, figure out how to break it, and then responding by figuring out how to secure it again.
Well, it sounds as though this is the sort of thing that's going to have an increasingly valuable application in the real world. What's going on out there in terms of threats on the international scene that you've been seeing just in current events over the last few months?
Sure. Well, I know about a month ago, around 2 weeks ago, the New York Times ran an article pointing out something called GhostNet, and this was actually an international network of hacked computer systems in governments around the world. I think it was something like 105 countries that they found systems in this network. And what's happening is, that the malicious, I'll call them malicious attackers or hackers, are sort of organizing better, and so they all are. They're hacking these government systems en masse, and then they're putting them together in one massive network that they can then centrally manage, actually. And they use this system to both carry out attacks on things like Google and Yahoo, like a simple denial of service that we've heard about in the past. But they also use these networks to try and gather information. Now, there hasn't been any clear indication that any of the recent events that we've seen there had specific ties to an international government, but I think there are a lot of people that think that there might be a tie to somebody like China or Russia.
Well, there was some interesting stuff going on during the conflict between Russia and Georgia, if memory serves, where Georgian websites, particularly government websites, were under a tremendous amount of internet assault during that conflict. And I think it was a New York Times piece I read that pointed out that in terms of expense, it's not real costly to get someone up and running to try and hack and take down a network. Is that right? Is it something that enably?
Absolutely. The Russia and Georgia situation was compounded by the fact that all of Georgia's connectivity actually ran through Russia. And so they didn't have a redundant connection going out to another nation in the area.
Sure.
And so Russia basically had a stranglehold on their pipeline, and all they had to do is have enough people throwing lots of traffic at it, committing a denial of service, like we've seen against the Yahoo or Google in the past. And really, it would be the equivalent of having 50 people come into the room right now and start screaming at us.
Right.
No one would be able to hear us because everyone is just yelling. It doesn't take any skill or ability, it just takes a lot of voices.
This is all a little, from my perspective, a little abstract when you're talking about a nation-to-nation level. What do individuals have to fear in terms of a lack of security online? Why should we be concerned as people?
Well, as individuals, computers, and we have broadband at home, and it's always on, and most of us leave our computers on all the time. It leaves our systems open as targets more frequently than it used to be back in the days of AOL, when you had 20 hours a month or 10 hours a month, so you never left it on. For us as individuals, the real threat is that somebody compromises our system and uses our system to carry out something like a denial of service attack. In general, I think the majority of users don't have a whole lot to worry about in terms of being specifically targeted as part of something like an identity theft scheme. Those individuals that have their identity theft, or identity stolen, wind up having their information compromised by larger organizations that had their information. Like if you use a credit card at Best Buy or Circuit City, well, Circuit City is no more.
Right, absolutely. So what can individuals do to protect themselves? Are there one or two or three simple things that we should be aware of if we're using a computer with a broadband connection, for example?
Sure. Number one I would say is make sure that your system gets patched regularly. Make sure that you're using antivirus, and don't be afraid to turn it off or unplug your wireless access point or your modem if it's not going to be used for a while.
Okay. Well, John Hoffoss, thank you so much for joining us here on the UpTake.
Thank you.
We are going to go to the UpTake Roundtable, but before we go to that, we're going to be watching a video from a local Tea Party protest talking about the tax changes that the Obama administration have been making. So we'll go to that video, and then we'll join you at the Roundtable.